The air in the Athelred Holdings headquarters was so still it felt like a held breath. On the 47th floor, where the carpets were thick enough to swallow sound and the windows stretched from polished floor to gleaming ceiling, the silence was a currency. It was a silence of concentration, of immense pressure, of deals being born and dying with the flick of a spreadsheet. And in the heart of this silence, in a conference room named the Stratosphere, a billion-dollar deal was currently in cardiac arrest. Alistair Finch, the CEO of Athelred, felt a bead of sweat trace a treacherous path down his temple, despite the room's Arctic climate control. He was a man carved from granite and ambition, his silver-haired temples and custom-tailored suit speaking of a lifetime of victories. But today, the facade was cracking. Across the vast, mahogany table, Mr. Kenji Tanaka and his team from the Hakone Corporation sat like impassive statues. The translator, a meticulous man with a nervous tic, was struggling. The term, equitable distribution of intellectual property post-acquisition, it is, nuanced, the translator stammered, his eyes darting between a legal pad and Tanaka's unreadable face. The nuance is, it implies a lack of initial trust, which in our culture. Tanaka gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. His second-in-command, a severe woman named Ms. Sato, leaned in and whispered something in rapid-fire Japanese. The entire Hakone delegation seemed to retreat further into a collective shell of polite disappointment. This wasn't about money anymore, it was about a chasm of understanding, a fundamental failure to connect. The deal, a complex merger that would have reshaped the global tech landscape, was bleeding out over a cultural misunderstanding. "We seem to be going in circles," Tanaka said in careful, heavily accented English, a sign of his growing frustration. The spirit of the agreement feels lost in translation. Alistair's knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the table. He had lawyers, financiers, the best minds money could buy, but no one who could bridge this invisible, yet uncrossable, divide. His eyes swept over his own team, a sea of panicked, pale faces. His gaze then landed on the periphery of the room, where the junior staffers were positioned to fetch water, print documents, and be invisible. His eyes snagged on a new face. A young black woman, her hair braided into an intricate crown, was standing near the door, a carafe of water in her hand. She had been silently refreshing glasses for the past hour. What caught his attention wasn't her quiet efficiency, but the expression on her face. While everyone else wore masks of panic or confusion, hers was one of intense, focused comprehension. Her eyes were fixed on Tanaka, not with the glassy stare of someone listening to a foreign language, but with the sharp understanding of someone following a complex argument. A memory, vague and irritating, flickered in Alistair's mind. A resume. This girl. He'd been in a foul mood that day, skimming through a stack of applications for an entry-level assistant role. Her resume had been ridiculous. Or so he'd thought. Fluent in 9 languages, it had stated. He remembered snorting, tossing it onto the pile for his HR director, Maria, with a dismissive scrawl, overqualified or over-imaginative. Check this. We don't need a linguist, we need a coffee fetcher who can use Excel. He'd assumed it was a typical embellishment, the kind of desperate inflation he saw from graduates of lesser-known colleges. Now, in the suffocating silence of the failing boardroom, that dismissed resume felt like a ghost haunting him. Desperation, a bitter and unfamiliar taste, flooded his mouth. He had no other moves left. He said, his voice cutting through the tense quiet like a shard of glass. Every head turned. He was pointing at the young woman. The intern. Come here. She didn't flinch. She placed the carafe down on a sideboard with a quiet, precise click and walked towards him, her posture unnervingly calm. Sir, what's your name? He barked, though he dimly recalled it from the mocked resume. Amara Johnson, sir. Alistair gestured vaguely towards the Hakone delegation. Your resume. It said you speak languages. Do you understand what they're saying? Amara's gaze was level. Yes, sir, I do. And what is the problem? He demanded, his voice low and urgent. The translator is failing. Why? Amara took a breath, and for a moment, she was no longer a junior assistant but an analyst assessing a critical data stream. The translator is technically accurate, sir, but culturally tone-deaf. He's translating Mr. Tanaka's words, but he's missing the context, the honorifics, the subtle humility. When Mr. Tanaka said. The spirit feels lost. He was actually being profoundly direct for a Japanese executive. It's a severe reprimand. The translator softened it. Ms. Sato just pointed out that the English term, equitable, is inherently adversarial in this context. She suggested the Japanese term, tekisei na bunpai, which implies a harmonious and appropriate sharing, a meeting of minds, not a division of spoils. The silence in the room was now of a different quality. It was no longer stagnant, but electric with shock. Alistair stared at her. His entire legal team stared at her. And most importantly, Kenji Tanaka was looking at her, his expression shifting from impassive to one of deep, surprised interest. How do you know that? Alistair whispered, his CEO bravado momentarily stripped away. I studied at the University of Accra for a year, focusing on cross-cultural linguistic structures, Amara replied, her voice still calm. And my grandmother was a diplomat. I grew up in embassies in Tokyo, Berlin, Cairo, and Buenos Aires. Languages were my playground. The ghost of the mocked resume solidified into a stunning, humiliating reality. Alistair felt a hot flush of shame, but it was immediately drowned out by a tidal wave of predatory opportunism. A tool. She was a tool he had almost thrown away. Fix this, he commanded, his voice regaining its steel. Get in there. Facilitate. Amara didn't move immediately. She looked from Alistair's desperate face to Tanaka's curious one. She knew the power dynamic had just irrevocably shifted. She was no longer the coffee fetcher. She was the only lifeline. She turned to Tanaka and his team, and when she spoke, her voice was different. It was lower, more melodic, and infused with a respect that the translators had utterly lacked. She didn't just speak Japanese, she performed it. The cadence, the slight bow of her head, the choice of formal honorifics, it was flawless. Tanaka-sama, o jikan o itadaki, mushiwake gozaimasen, she began. Mr. Tanaka, thank you for your time, and my deepest apologies. The failure in communication is ours, not yours. The intent on Athelred's side is one of deep respect for Hakone's legacy. May I attempt to reframe the proposal, focusing on the shared vision rather than the contractual mechanics? Tanaka's eyes widened slightly. He nodded, a genuine, unforced gesture for the first time in hours. Hi, ongeshimasu. Yes, please. What followed was not a translation, it was a transubstantiation. Amara became a conduit. She moved around the table, not as a subordinate, but as a neutral arbiter. She would listen to Alistair's blunt, aggressive English, and she would transform it into a proposal of mutual benefit and esteemed partnership for the Japanese executives. She would then take Tanaka's nuanced, indirect concerns and articulate them to Alistair with a clarity his own team had failed to provide. At one point, Alistair, frustrated, said, "Just tell him we need a decision by close of business tomorrow or we walk." Amara turned to him, her eyes sharp. "Sir, if I say that, the deal will die this instant." In his culture, that is the height of disrespect. It's an ultimatum, a declaration of war. She then turned back to Tanaka and said, in Japanese, Finch-sama expresses a keen desire to move forward with alacrity, respecting the immense value of your time, and wonders if a path to mutual agreement might be reached by tomorrow's sunset, so we may celebrate this new partnership. Tanaka nodded thoughtfully. His urgency is understood. We share it. The breakthrough came during a discussion about the merged company's R&D hub. The lawyers were stuck on location and tax incentives. Amara, listening to a side conversation between Tanaka and Sato about the quality of local schools and the serenity of a potential site near Kyoto, understood the real issue. It wasn't about money, it was about soul. She interrupted the financial haggling. Mr. Finch, she said, switching back to English. The Hakone team is concerned about the well-being of their key engineers and their families. They believe true innovation springs from a tranquil mind. They are not just moving offices, they are moving a culture. The tax incentive is secondary to the quality of life. Perhaps we could propose the Kyoto location, with Athelred funding a state-of-the-art corporate wellness and family integration program. Alistair, a man who thought in profit margins and stock prices, was baffled. Wellness. That's fluff. It's the foundation of their entire corporate philosophy, sir, Amara countered, her voice firm. It's the reason their engineers are so loyal and innovative. To ignore it is to ignore the heart of what we're buying. Grudgingly, Alistair agreed. When Amara presented the offer, framing it not as a concession but as a tribute to Hakone's superior corporate values, the atmosphere in the room transformed. The icy politeness thawed into genuine warmth. Tanaka smiled, a real, crinkle-eyed smile, and began speaking directly to Amara, bypassing the official translator entirely. 2 hours later, the deal was saved. Handshakes were exchanged, not the brittle, hurried shakes of before, but firm, respectful grips. The Hakone delegation bowed deeply to Amara on their way out, a gesture they did not extend to Alistair Finch. When the door closed, leaving only the Athelred team in the room, the silence returned. It was thick with awe and a palpable, collective embarrassment. Alistair stood by the window, looking down at the ant-like traffic far below. His billion-dollar deal, his legacy, had been saved by the very person he had dismissed as an over-imaginative coffee fetcher. He turned slowly. The junior staff had already scurried out. Only his senior VPs and Amara remained. She was gathering her notepad, her posture once again that of the unassuming assistant, but the power she had wielded still shimmered around her like a halo. "Johnson," Alistair said, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "My office, now." He walked out without another word. Amara followed, feeling the weight of every stare in the room. The walk to the CEO's corner office was long and silent. She entered the sprawling, minimalist space, its walls adorned with trophies of his conquests. He didn't sit behind his mammoth desk. Instead, he stood before the glass wall, his back to her for a long moment. When he turned, the granite mask was gone. He looked tired, and for the first time, his age was showing. "That resume," he began, then stopped, clearing his throat. "I remember it. I thought it was a lie." "Who speaks 9 languages?" "Someone who spent her life learning how to listen, sir," Amara replied softly. He flinched, as if she'd struck him. "You heard what I said to HR. About the coffee. It was office gossip within an hour, sir." The shame he had suppressed in the boardroom now flooded him, hot and undeniable. He had been not just wrong, but arrogantly, destructively wrong. He had judged a masterpiece by its frame. "I owe you an apology, Amara," he said, the words seeming foreign and clumsy in his mouth. "A profound one. My prejudice and my haste nearly cost this company everything. You didn't just save a deal today. You exposed a critical flaw in our leadership. We look for people who fit a mold, and in doing so, we miss the diamonds." He walked to his desk and picked up a tablet, tapping a few commands. "The internship is over. Effective immediately. Our is drawing up a new contract. You are now the head of global communications and cultural strategy. You'll report directly to me. The salary will be commensurate with the value you just demonstrated. Which is to say, it will be substantial." Amara absorbed this without a change in expression. She had expected a thank you, perhaps a bonus. Not this. Not a corporate catapult into the executive stratosphere. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice steady. "I accept. On one condition." Alistair almost smiled. No one placed conditions on Alistair Finch. But today, everyone was learning new rules. Which is, that we overhaul the recruitment process. That we stop using culture fit as a synonym for people who look and sound like us. That we start looking for the resumes that look over-imaginative, because those are the ones that might just hold the key to our next billion-dollar deal, or save one. Alistair Finch looked at the young woman standing before him, poised, intelligent, and possessing a quiet power that his corner office and his billions could never buy. He saw the future of his company, and it didn't look like him. It was braided, it was multilingual, and it was brilliant. "Done," he said. "The first initiative of your new department." He extended his hand. Amara took it. Her handshake was firm, confident, and equal. As she left the office, the setting sun casting long shadows across the plush carpet, the whispers started anew. But they were different now. They weren't the mocking whispers about a mocked resume. They were the hushed, respectful tones reserved for a rising power. The girl who spoke 9 languages hadn't just saved a deal, she had, in one afternoon, rewritten the entire story. And Alistair Finch, the man who had once mocked her, was now her most powerful and most humbled ally.